March 11, 1945, Okinawa, Japan. Cold rain slid across the broken ridgelines, tapping against shattered coral rock like distant typewriter keys. And in the middle of that grey, wind-carved battlefield stood Captain Ron Hale, a man most of his own company quietly dismissed. He was tall but thin, with a stiff gait from an old training injury, and hands that trembled whenever artillery rolled across the horizon. Rumours swirled around him, whispered intense, traded over tin cups of bitter coffee. They called him Half-Step Hale, a captain too slow to lead, too hesitant to follow, a man who had somehow slipped through the war's cracks and ended up commanding a squad that barely acknowledged him. Behind his back, Marines muttered that he had never earned the rank. Some claimed he froze during drills. Others swore he couldn't keep up on night marches. None of them expected him to last long on Okinawa, a place where even stones seemed to bleed. That morning, his platoon assembled along the base of a ravaged hill called Ketsu Ridge. The wind hissed through bent rebar and shrapnel-scarred trees, scattering ash from burnt-out Japanese fortifications. Captain Hale stood slightly apart, helmet low, unable to hide the slight shake in his left hand as he tightened the strap of his canteen. The men noticed. They always noticed. They pretended not to look at him as the battalion commander announced the mission, a short-range reconnaissance push toward a suspected Japanese tunnel system. Routine, they said. Low risk. In truth, nothing on Okinawa was low risk. But the platoon needed a captain present for authorization, and Hale, like it or not, was the only one available. The men groaned beneath their breath. They didn't want him. They didn't trust him. But regulations dragged him along like dead weight. The patrol moved out by noon. Rain thickened into a metallic mist that clung to rifles and backpacks, softening footsteps into mush on the churned ground. Hale followed several paces behind the lead fire team, trying to ignore the sideways glances, the barely concealed annoyance every time he adjusted his pace or hesitated at a crossroad of trenches. The men forged ahead without waiting for direction. Hale felt more like an unwanted observer than a commander. They reached the outskirts of a ravine tangled with bamboo roots and half-buried debris, shattered helmets, fragments of artillery splinters, pieces of uniforms swallowed by mud. A single wounded American lay among them, half-hidden, half-buried, barely moving. At first Hale thought he was another corpse. But when the Marines' fingers twitched weakly toward the patrol, Hale's world locked into focus. It was Private Tom Reeves, a radio man from a sister company, drenched in mud, chest rising in shallow, rattling breaths. A Japanese round had torn through his abdomen. The patrol hesitated. They whispered that Reeves wouldn't last an hour, that Japanese snipers often used wounded Americans as bait. Leave him, that was the unspoken rule this deep behind shifting lines. But Hale knelt beside the dying Marine, his shaky hands suddenly steady as stone. He felt the faint pulse, fading but real. The platoon sergeant urged him to move on. The mission mattered. Reeves would slow them down. The enemy was close. The ridge was crawling with hidden machine gun nests. Hale didn't move. Something in the wounded man's eyes, a silent plea, a refusal to die alone, froze the world around him. Hale ordered the squad to stretcher Reeves and fall back. The men didn't like it. They muttered that the captain finally snapped. But the order stood. They lifted Reeves. Hale took the rearguard. The ambush came less than 3 minutes later. The ravine exploded with fire, muzzle flashes blooming in the bamboo, Japanese infantry erupting from spider holes and camouflaged tunnels. Bullets ripped into the squad before they had time to shout. 2 Marines collapsed instantly. Another stumbled, clutching a shredded shoulder. Hale fired once, twice, single shots swallowed by the thunder of machine guns. Reeves slipped from the stretcher as the Marines panicked under the shock of the ambush. Someone yelled to drop the wounded man. Someone else screamed to run. Then the hillside detonated as a mortar round fell behind them, spraying stone fragments into the air like razors. The patrol broke apart, scrambling for cover. Men vanished into smoke and mud. Some fell before they made it 3 steps. Others disappeared into bamboo, chased by gunfire. When the smoke thinned, Hale found himself alone, truly alone, crouched behind a cracked stone pillar of an old Japanese bunker. Reeves lay in the mud a few yards away, bleeding out, barely conscious. The rest of the squad was gone. Hale checked his weapon, 1 M1 carbine, 2 magazines, 1 half empty, 1 nearly full, and a single fragmentation grenade strapped to his belt. That was all he had behind enemy lines. The wind rose, carrying the metallic scent of blood and the distant hiss of Japanese voices closing in. The last glimmer of daylight faded behind thick storm clouds, turning the ravine into a labyrinth of shadow. Hale dragged Reeves toward a collapsed bunker entrance, breath shaking, hands muddy and slick. Reeves groaned, barely audible, barely alive. The ground trembled with approaching footsteps. Enemy patrols were converging on the ravine. Hale had seconds to choose: abandon the wounded Marine and save himself, or refuse to leave him and face the oncoming storm alone. He tightened his grip on Reeves' gear and pulled him deeper into the darkness. Just as a Japanese lantern swung over the ridge above, its trembling light sliding across the rubble like a hunting eye. The lantern's glow wavered across the ravine like a blade of amber, cutting through the smoke and rain as if searching for breath itself. Captain Ron Hale pressed his body against the collapsed bunker wall, dragging the barely conscious Reeves deeper inside. The bunker smelled of rusted metal, stagnant water, and old fires long extinguished. Loose stones shifted beneath Hale's boots, grinding softly, too softly, he prayed, as enemy footsteps crunched above the entrance. The patrol halted just outside. Hale froze, breath held, pulse hammering loud enough he feared it might echo across the chamber. The Japanese soldiers murmured to each other, voices low, methodical. A metal canteen clinked. A rifle sling creaked. Rain dripped from the roof of the bunker's entrance in slow, cold taps that sounded impossibly loud in the tight darkness. Reeves' breathing grew ragged. Hale pressed his hand over the Marine's mouth, not to suffocate him, but to steady him. The tremor in Reeves' chest vibrated against Hale's palm, a faint, fragile rhythm fighting against the darkness closing in. The patrol lingered. Too long. Far too long. Hale's fingers tightened around the grip of his M1 carbine, but he knew firing would end them both. One magazine couldn't stop a full patrol. Not here. Not in these tunnels. A beam of lantern light sliced down into the bunker, drifting closer to the place where Hale crouched. It grazed the curve of Reeves' helmet, catching the edge of the blood running down his chin. Hale shifted his weight, using his own shadow to block the reflection. The lantern swept another inch downward. Then a shout echoed across the ridge, distant but sharp, drawing the patrol's attention. They barked quick responses, boots splashing through mud as they moved away. The lantern's glow receded. The voices dissolved into the storm. Only then did Hale whisper into the darkness, not words, not comfort, but a steady exhale as if willing Reeves back into silence. The bunker swallowed the sound. Hours passed. Night settled across Okinawa like a heavy shroud. Wind pushed through shattered vent shafts in long, hollow moans. Water dripped from ceiling cracks, coating the floor in cold puddles that seeped through Hale's torn boots. The storm outside carried the distant rumble of artillery, American shells pounding ridges somewhere far from this ravine. Every impact trembled through the ground. Hale listened for movement. He heard it often. Enemy patrols sweeping the kill zone, searching for survivors. Searching for them. He pressed Reeves' bandage again, tightening the field dressing until blood soaked through his sleeves. The Marine's pulse fluttered. Weak. But alive. Hale's mind replayed the ambush, the screams, the bamboo exploding into splinters, the way men vanished as if the earth swallowed them. He knew the rest of the platoon was gone. He knew no one expected them to return. And he knew command would never search these ravines tonight. Not in this weather. Not under these conditions. They were alone. Behind enemy lines. With only one weapon and less than 2 magazines. A deep chill crept through the bunker. Reeves shivered uncontrollably, his skin turning clammy beneath Hale's steady hands. Infection, shock, blood loss, they were closing in faster than the enemy patrols. Hale needed to move. He waited until the storm masked the crunch of his steps, then lifted Reeves carefully onto his shoulders. The Marine was dead weight, limp, cold, barely responsive. Hale staggered under the load, grinding his teeth as his injured leg buckled. Pain shot up his thigh. He steadied himself against the bunker wall, breathing hard. He'd been mocked for that limp. Whispered about. Overlooked. Tonight, it could get them both killed. Still, he pushed forward. The bunker tunnel led to a narrow fissure in the rock, a gap barely wide enough for a man to slip through. Hale angled Reeves' body carefully, inching sideways until they emerged behind a shattered outcrop on the far side of the ravine. The storm shielded them, as did the darkness. Enemy lanterns bobbed in the distance, a line of glowing eyes sweeping the terrain. Hale lowered Reeves gently into a shallow depression at the base of a hill. The mud was icy, but it hid the Marine beneath a natural curtain of tall grass and scattered stone. Hale crouched low beside him, scanning the terrain through sheets of rain. A patrol moved along the western edge of the ravine, rifles raised. Another 2 soldiers walked opposite, climbing toward the ridge line. Lanterns swayed. Shadows stretched. Hale realized something chilling. They were narrowing the search. He felt exposed. He felt helpless. But deeper than that, a new feeling stirred, one he rarely felt in combat. Resolve. He checked his ammo. 1 magazine and 9 rounds left in the partial. Not enough to fight through, but maybe enough to mislead. He took a long, steady breath, then crawled away from Reeves, careful not to disturb the grass. He moved like a shadow, low, silent, using the curve of the terrain to mask each shift of his weight. The rain washed mud over his uniform, turning him into part of the ground. He reached a cluster of rocks and waited. The patrol approached Reeves' hiding spot, too close, far too close. Hale raised the carbine and fired a single shot into the opposite hillside. The sound cracked through the ravine, bouncing between walls of stone. Enemy voices erupted instantly, shouting, converging on the false location. The distraction worked. For now. But the shot also revealed something else. The patrols knew someone was alive. And they were no longer sweeping. They were hunting. Hale pressed his forehead against the cold rock, breath shaking, water dripping down his helmet. He realized the storm had just become the only thing keeping them alive, and storms never lasted long. Lightning illuminated the ravine for a split second, revealing something that froze him in place. A new squad of Japanese soldiers emerging from a hidden tunnel entrance behind him, fanning out silently, rifles raised, creeping toward the precise spot Hale had used as his distraction. They would find the muzzle flash. They would find the tracks. They would find him. And then they would find Reeves. The storm thundered again as Hale wiped rain from his eyes and sank lower into the mud, gripping his nearly empty weapon. He had seconds before they closed in. And somewhere ahead, another lantern ignited, casting its harsh glow directly across the grass where Reeves lay hidden. The lantern's white flare cut through the darkness like a blade, sweeping across the grass, inching closer to the shallow depression where Reeves lay half buried in mud. Captain Ron Hale felt his pulse slam against his ribs. Rain hammered his helmet in cold needles. His fingers tightened around the M1 carbine as he flattened deeper into the earth. Every instinct screamed to run, to drag Reeves into another hiding place, to flee before the lantern's glow exposed the dying Marine. But movement now would be suicide. The Japanese patrol behind Hale was already closing in, boots sliding softly through wet stone. Another squad approached from the ridge ahead, rifles tilted, lanterns probing the storm. He was trapped. Hale felt the earth tremble with their steps. The wind howled through the ravine, rattling loose debris, carrying the metallic tang of spent gunpowder. Thunder rolled overhead, masking some sounds but amplifying others. The soft click of a rifle safety, the wet hiss of boots in mud, the steady drip of water from roots above. Reeves' breath rasped faintly, barely there, barely human. Hale's mind raced. He had 1 full magazine, 9 rounds in the other. 18 bullets, at most. 20 enemies, at least. He could kill a few, maybe even break through the cordon. But Reeves couldn't move on his own. Hale refused, absolutely refused, to abandon him. The title of this nightmare had been chosen the moment he saw the Marine bleeding in the mud. That choice would be the line he drew, even if he died on it. He crawled backward, sliding through mud so cold it burned his skin. The Japanese search party ahead drew nearer, their lantern casting long, skeletal shadows. Hale watched the reflection off their bayonets tremble in the stormlight. They were less than 15 yards from Reeves. Too close. One more step and the Marine's helmet would catch the beam. Hale steadied his breathing. His hands shook again, the same tremor the men used to mock. But now it blended with adrenaline, forging something sharper. He gripped the grenade at his belt. A last resort. He pulled it free, weighing it in his palm. The metal was slick from rain, heavy with possibility. If he threw it toward the ridge patrol, the explosion would blind them, scatter them. but the sound would also draw every enemy within a half-mile. If he threw it behind him, toward the tunnel squad, he might seal part of the entrance and buy a few seconds. If he used it too early, they died. If he used it too late, Reeves died. Survival narrowed to a single breath. The lantern ahead dipped. It swept over the grass. Another inch. Another inch. And stopped. A sudden burst of wind shoved the lantern flame sideways. Rain blew across the glass, smearing its glow. The soldier holding it muttered in frustration and covered the lantern with his hand, shielding it from the storm. The beam shifted away from Reeves. Hale's lungs unlocked. He didn't hesitate. He crawled 2 feet left, sank into deeper mud, and pulled Reeves' pack-strap toward him, dragging it silently across the ground until the Marine's helmet lay hidden behind a slab of stone. The effort strained every muscle in Hale's back. His injured leg trembled under the weight. The tremor became pain. Pain became fire. Still he moved. The 2 Japanese squads murmured to each other, confused by the earlier shot, still triangulating its direction. Hale saw their silhouettes through the sheets of rain, overlapping shadows, tightening arcs, narrowing the kill zone. He had seconds. He reached into Reeves' pouch, pulling out the radio man's cracked handset. The wire was frayed, its casing blown open by shrapnel. He pressed it to his ear. Nothing. Dead. Lightning flashed, and Hale saw something he had missed earlier. A rusted ventilation shaft, half buried in mud, leading deeper under the ridge. A black void. Narrow, but not impossible. Cover. Shelter. A path forward. But Reeves would never fit unless Hale dragged him on hands and knees through a tunnel barely wide enough for their shoulders. Boots splashed behind him. The tunnel patrol had reached the rocks where Hale fired the decoy shot. One soldier knelt, running his fingers through the mud, lifting a handful, examining the disturbed tracks. He pointed. Straight toward Hale's position. The ridge patrol answered the signal with a sharp whistle, lanterns converging, their movements suddenly fast, coordinated, predatory. Hale didn't think. He didn't wait. He pulled the pin from the grenade. He didn't throw it far, only enough to bounce it off a stone toward the tunnel entrance behind him. The metallic clink echoed sharply through the ravine. A beat of silence. Then a muffled whomp of fire and soil erupting upward. The shockwave knocked Hale onto his elbows, mud splashing over his face. One patrol screamed in confusion. Another broke formation. Lanterns jerked wildly, beams twisting like panicked searchlights. Hale lunged for Reeves, hooking his arms under the Marine's shoulders. He dragged him toward the ventilation shaft, boots tearing through wet earth. Reeves moaned, blood trailing behind in a dark smear. Hale ignored the pain in his leg. His breath came in sharp, burning gasps. He pushed Reeves toward the shaft's narrow opening just as rifle shots cracked behind him. A bullet ricocheted off the stone at his feet. Another slammed into the ground beside Reeves. Hale shoved the Marine head-first into the shaft, mud caking their uniforms. He followed immediately, pulling his carbine in after him as rounds tore into the ridge above. Enemy voices roared in anger. Flashlights and lanterns swarmed the outer ravine. Hale crawled deeper into the darkness, dragging Reeves inch by inch, his shoulders scraping raw against the jagged, wet rock. The shaft narrowed, forcing Hale to twist sideways. He felt the enemy closing behind, boots pounding the mud, rifle bolts slamming into place, commands shouted over the storm. They were coming into the tunnel after him. The shaft twisted, steepening. Water trickled over Hale's helmet. Reeves' breathing faded into shallow, broken gasps. Hale's muscles burned. His weapon knocked against stone, echoing dangerously loud. A faint orange glow suddenly appeared behind them, small at first, then growing. A lantern. The enemy had entered the tunnel. Hale kept crawling, pushing Reeves forward with both arms. But then the shaft dropped abruptly into a vertical pit, 6 feet down, maybe more, filled with water and shadows. There was no other path. No time. No choice. Enemy voices were less than 10 feet behind. Reeves slipped. Hale reached out, grabbing the Marine's wrist just as he slid into the drop. Water splashed upward. The lantern's glow sharpened behind them, illuminating the slick stone walls. A Japanese soldier shouted as he spotted them. Hale's grip faltered. His hand trembled. Reeves' weight dragged him toward the drop. The enemy raised a rifle, and Hale felt his fingers slipping from Reeves' slick, blood-coated wrist. Captain Ron Hale's grip slipped once, twice, his fingers skidding across Reeves' icy, blood-slick skin. The radio man dangled over the vertical shaft, boots kicking weakly in the darkness below. The lantern behind them flared brighter, casting the narrow tunnel in a deep amber glow. Hale saw the Japanese soldier's face for the first time, calm, focused, eyes narrowed behind the rifle sights. Rainwater dripped from his helmet, falling in slow beads onto the rifle barrel. The muzzle centered on Hale. The tunnel was too narrow to dodge, too tight to fire back. Reeves' weight dragged at his arm, tendons burning, fingers screaming, pain radiating through his weakened leg. Another inch and he would lose him forever. Hale made his choice. He let go of the wall, braced, and threw himself backward into the pit. He dragged Reeves down with him. A burst of gunfire exploded above as Hale and Reeves fell into black water. The impact tore air from Hale's lungs. The world vanished into freezing shock. The water swallowed them both, pulling them into a lightless void. Hale fought to surface, kicking through debris, forcing Reeves upward until their heads broke through, gasping. Bullets tore into the water around them, slicing into the pool with sharp metallic plunks. Lantern light poured down the shaft, fractured by ripples. Hale grabbed Reeves by the collar and pulled him against the far side of the chamber. The cavern extended deeper, an old auxiliary tunnel, flooded but intact. Darkness stretched ahead like a hidden artery beneath the ridge. He forced himself forward, one arm wrapped under Reeves' chest, dragging him through waist-deep water. Every movement sent pain shooting through his injured leg. His breath rasped. Each pull felt heavier than the last. But behind them, enemy boots clattered against stone as soldiers climbed down the pit in pursuit. The enemy was coming. The flooded tunnel narrowed again, forcing Hale to crouch, then crawl. Water sloshed around them, echoing up the walls with hollow metallic resonance. Reeves moaned faintly, still alive, just enough to remind Hale of his weight, his fragility, his humanity. Wind whispered through cracks above, carrying the distant thump of artillery and the hum of aircraft overhead. Hale remembered the men who had mocked him, doubted him, shaken their heads whenever he limped. He remembered being told he didn't belong, that he would break, that he would slow them down. Now he crawled with a wounded Marine strapped across his shoulders, a rifle slung on his back, and a tunnel full of enemies closing behind him. He moved anyway. Minutes stretched into a slow nightmare. The tunnel twisted, dipped, rose again. Water dripped steadily from unseen cracks, tapping like a broken Morse code. Hale's breath echoed in the tight space. The air grew stale. The walls pressed in, scraping his forearms raw. Then, light. A faint blue-gray shimmer ahead. Hale squinted, crawling faster until the tunnel widened into a cracked storage chamber. A rusted metal grate had collapsed, opening to the outside. Rain blew through the gap. Lightning flashed beyond the rock, illuminating the outer face of the ridge. He was close. He pushed Reeves through the opening first, then pulled himself out onto a ledge overlooking a ravine choked with mud, broken trees, and the skeletal remains of an abandoned Japanese supply trail. Far in the distance, beyond the storm, Hale saw the dim glow of American positions, still miles away, but reachable. A shout rose from within the tunnel. The enemy had reached the chamber. Hale slung Reeves over his shoulder once more, staggering down the slope. Mud clung to them like a living thing. Every step sank an inch deeper into the earth. Hale's injured leg buckled twice. He refused to stop. Behind them, lanterns emerged from the fissure, glowing like predatory eyes. The Japanese soldiers shouted. Hale ran. The storm pummeled him with sheets of water. His boots slipped on wet stone. He half slid, half stumbled down the ridge, using roots and collapsed timbers to guide himself. Reeves' breathing rattled against his shoulder, faint but present. Bullets cracked through the rain. Hale zigzagged through fallen branches, pulling Reeves behind a toppled tree trunk. Splinters rained down as rounds tore into the bark. The enemy was closing the distance fast. Hale checked his magazines. One nearly empty. One full. 18 rounds. He waited. Footsteps splashed closer. Lantern light flickered through the rain. The first soldier crested the ridge, rifle raised. Hale fired once. The shot echoed like thunder. The soldier dropped. More came. Hale fired again, and again, 5 rounds, 6, 7. Each muzzle flash lit his face in stark white bursts. The storm roared, drowning the sound of his breathing, but not the clicking of the bolt as the partial magazine emptied. He swapped mags, hands slick with blood and rain. He needed to buy time, seconds, nothing more. The final patrol advanced through the smoke and rain. Hale fired until the bolt locked back on an empty chamber. 7 bodies lay still. 3 remained. They sprinted through the downpour. Hale had nothing left but a muddy carbine and his own battered will. He stepped from behind the fallen tree. Lightning carved the battlefield open for an instant. Hale stared down the ridge at the last 3 soldiers charging toward Reeves. Even unarmed, even broken, he moved forward, one slow, limping step after another, placing himself between the dying Marine and the enemy. A distant rumble rolled across the valley. Not thunder. Engines. American Shermans emerged on a far ridge, headlights cutting through the storm. Infantry followed, rifles raised. A flare burst from behind them, casting the ravine in harsh red light. The Japanese patrol halted. Hale stood alone in the open, coat torn, helmet dented, mud dripping from his arms, chest heaving like he'd fought the ocean itself. Then the American tanks opened fire. The ridge lit up with explosions. Mud erupted skyward. The last of the Japanese disappeared in the shockwaves. Hale shielded Reeves with his body as debris rained down. A blast knocked him forward, slamming him into the ground. Pain flared up his spine. Then, silence. Only rain. Only breath. Only survival. American infantry rushed down the slope, shouting for medics. Hale felt hands grabbing his shoulders, lifting him, pulling Reeves away to safety. He tried to speak but only coughed muddy water. A medic stared at him, eyes wide. "You carried him all the way through that?" Hale didn't answer. He simply watched Reeves disappear under white canvas and steady hands. Wind moaned across the ridge. The storm quieted. And Captain Ron Hale, once mocked, once doubted, lay in the mud, trembling, exhausted, alive. He had refused to abandon a wounded soldier. What followed became legend. And long after the war ended, veterans swore that on nights when storms rolled across Okinawa, you could still hear a single set of footsteps limping through the ravine, carrying a brother who refused to die alone.